Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to go in the alphabetical order as the guru known as Word Perfect. And we're going to let the guests introduce themselves. So we're going to start with you, Miss Chloe Garner.
Hello, I am Chloe Garner. I write science fiction, fantasy, in massive, absolutely chaotic universes.
You? Chaotic? No.
Never.
Never. All right, Miss HP, otherwise known as Heather Hollow.
All right, well, I write as two different people. I write as Edie Skye and as HP Hollow. Both are fun fantasy adventures. The only significant difference is HP Hollow is sort of clean and Edie Skye is smut. So
first off, this is what happens, Nick, when we put Jana next to people on the panel, suddenly they start getting extra personalities too. And maybe we should start documenting this to see if it's a thing. Like, if I move Chloe up there, does she suddenly start writing as other people too? I don't know. We're going to find out.
She might.
Chloe writing smut? I'm in.
Awkward. We'll move on. So is it true that the P is for perfectly perfect in every way? Is that what it is, Heather?
yes, it's very, very true.
All right, I knew that. All right, next we have Miss Jana S. Brown, the many personalities therein.
Woohoo! Yeah, I'm Jana S. Brown. I also write as Jenna Ray. Under Jenna Ray, I write science fiction, fantasy, urban fantasy, all of the weird and the wonderful, often with smoochies.
Not the smoochies.
Oh,
see, Heather, she's corrupted you already. Now you write smoochies.
See? It spreads. It's the goodness. It will spread to everybody sooner or later.
I was going to say it breeds, but maybe that's the wrong expression. We're going to move on. Nathan, tell us about yourself.
On this little column.
Wow.
My name is Nathan Petty. I am probably the only Canadian on this panel from the dark reaches of Vancouver Island. So it is still daylight. Where it's for JR, it's not. Wow. Anyways, I write just a little stab. I write science fiction fantasy. I do a lot of sci-fi crime novels, which is what I've been working on at the moment. I also write Sword and Sorcery, Miller Sci-Fi, Gamelit. What don't I write? I just working on the publishing part.
He's published in almost every one of my anthologies. He's got a story in almost all of them.
He says, I have an anthology, and I say, shut up, just let me write.
I'm not supposed to tell him anymore. His wife was like, no, stop giving him more ideas. He needs to finish the novels. But I don't listen. No, don't do that very well. All right. And last, certainly not least, we got Miss Terry K. Job, the many voices of.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, indeed. Terry K. Job, audiobook narrator and baby author, still working on getting her wings to work. But we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're going to fly somewhere.
I'm just thinking that I've read some of Chloe's books and you doing her voices. I could see that working. There might be some compersion there. I'm just saying. All right. And the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, I'm supposed to tell you how we first found them. Everyone mute yourself so you don't hear this. The Illuminati, dear listener. I can't say anything else, just the Illuminati. All right. See, no. All right. See, they kicked Nick off again. They're listening, people. All right, Nathan, this is your first time on the panel, so you do have to answer the religion questions. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
None of the above.
What?
Oh!
He's Canadian.
Babylon 5. I have reasons we can go into them, but I could probably write an English paper on them. On what's wrong with those stories. Babylon 5, however, I like.
Babylon 5 is a fair replacement. I totally agree with you on that one.
By the powers of nerddom, unite. All right. And are you ready for round 2, sir?
Sure.
Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia?
Again, none of the above. The Maloyan and Bulgarian fittings.
Excellent choices. That was some of the first full novels I read, but we tried to pick books that were in multiple properties, so...
I've thought long and hard about those questions, and it's none of the above. I couldn't.
You can't take it back anymore. You're screwed. We all know. All right. Now, this is the most important one as an adult. Are you ready? You take a deep breath. What is your favorite dinosaur?
The raptor.
Excellent answer. All right. Do you have a favorite raptor?
I can't remember what they're called, but they're really tiny. They're that big and.
Yeah. Isn't that the Velociraptor and then the Utah
No.
Raptor? Big ones? Or am I
You're
getting
correct,
that?
it's the big one.
Velociraptor is about 3-4 feet, I think.
Okay.
Tiny ones that killed me on Ark over and over again when I first started playing. I know these beasts.
All right.
Oh, it's called
We've
the
got a.
chicken raptors. Like, I know that's not their name, but I just call them chicken raptors.
That's acceptable, though.
I-
I'm giving you points.
Oh, wow.
I award you your points today. All right. And because we are civilized, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. Well, maybe Nick. It's debatable. Depends on the day of the week. But coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
Coffee, black like my soul.
That's acceptable.
Well, there you go.
All right.
My
I will
stepdad
remove
tells-
the cursor from the remove portion.
Thank you, Nick. You did your job.
I don't
What's
know.
that?
The first two religion questions, I was like, oh, so removed. And he answered with the blackest soul coffee. And I'm like, all right, he can stay.
You can stay.
That's acceptable. I'm told when I grow up, I will drink my coffee black, but I guess I'm just never growing up.
Well, how I did it was I cut sugar out of my diet, and I used the fake sugar, the stevia, I think it's called, but it's expensive. And then I decided that screw this, it's too expensive, and then they start drinking it black. And because I haven't had sweets for such a long time, the bitterness was fine. So just stop eating sugar.
I love the bitterness.
I have very little left to live for at my age, so I'm just going to go with it. All right, people. All right. So the topic, if you read the episode title, the Fang Gang, more about vampires. Obviously, we're here to talk vampires, but we're going to start with, since everyone clearly knows what a vampire is, I don't think we need to define our terms. But what is it about vampires? Oh, judgment-free zone. I don't know about that. I judge hard. What is it about vampires that makes it such an enduring mythos?
Not everybody at
Stabby,
once. Calm down.
Hold on. Stabby looked it up. The Microraptor was a very small feathered dinosaur with wings on its legs as well as its arms, and it was a member of the Dromaeosaur group. It was related to the well-known Velociraptor. There we go.
Yeah, I was just trying to
Yeah,
do
that was my
dinosaurs in the
that was
chat.
my nickname in college.
So if you don't know that when the FBI does the research on people, sometimes they just call Stabby and they're like, hey, can you find this person for me? She's like, I got you, fam.
That's true.
No, Cat,
Stabby
for
tried
real,
to take-
bro. You're doing too much.
All right. So what do you think makes the vampire such an enduring mythos?
In terms of the general concept of the vampire, for me, it's the versatility, because you can have these absolute terrible monster vampires, but then on the complete opposite end, you have the romantic vampires, which have elements of danger, but there's certainly sexiness there too. And there's just between those two, there's a really wide range. And that's primarily why they appeal to me, because it's kind of like, get you someone who can do both. And vampires are all that.
Ain't a bag of chips. See, I know the cool lingo too.
Nope, bag of blood.
Oh, bag of blood.
All that and
True blood.
go there. It has to go there.
So
But
when
the other thing is, it's all about primal fears, and
Okay.
and that whole the vampire mythos comes from that primal fear of what happens if the people you put in the ground don't stay there. And since that happened at various times in various places where people were buried on accident and they were still alive, and also it was explaining things like you dig people up on accident and they've got big old long nails and all of this because they didn't understand that these things keep happening after death. So it made for this really creepy, lovely mythology, and that's kind of sunk into everything else. And then you get into low-lying places like New Orleans, where we do a lot of vampire work. I love writing about vampires in New Orleans. And the thing in New Orleans is you don't bury your dead. Because if you put your dead in that water table, then at the next storm, they come right back up. And so there's this horror about, we have put this person in the ground and they didn't stay there. And that's kind of an enduring scariness of what really happens after death. Could you come back? All of those things. And so it's fun because it tickles right at the back of your neck.
Yeah, I think that all of the undead kind of have that mythos of what is it that people are after they're dead, and if they don't stay down when they're dead, that's really scary. And you've got your zombies and you've got your mummies, and those are all uniformly scary, but none of those typically turn into a romance figure the way that a vampire does. And I think that the vampire is the romantic end of that spectrum because they are need. They have to consume human energy in order to continue going, where the other undead just eat dead meat. They view people as meat rather than an energy source and an ongoing source of just the visceral and the organic need. And the intelligence and the longevity that's attributed to them turns them into a really interesting set of characteristics because they're entirely dependent, but they're also very, very powerful. And that's a really cool dichotomy.
Yeah, historically speaking, what I found really fascinating was it was in the 1800s. It was a real fear. They didn't understand consumption. I can't remember. There's a scientific word for it. I was listening to it the other day, another podcast about vampires, and where you're being eaten. You know, your face is getting sunken, and they thought it was this person, and so they dig up the body, and look, their hair is growing, their nails are growing. This is a real thing, and so they take steps. They find skeletons with stakes in their hearts. Like they were very afraid of this. And now, in modern times, we've taken that and flipped it a little bit. I mean, it's gotten flipped to where they're shiny and silly. But then there's other ones that are really good.
We don't do that here. We don't talk about those.
So there's twofold. Partly because they didn't understand medicine as well. There are times where there were people that they thought were dead that weren't. So now when they rise up, it's not, oh, we misdiagnosed. It's, oh, clearly supernatural. I wonder how many people they misdiagnosed as dead and then they killed them for real because they thought they were a monster.
I just saw a story on this about Alexander the Great, that someone claimed that he was buried alive. He wasn't buried alive. He would never would have survived the embalming process, but they suspect that he was in a coma and he was thought to be dead before they started tearing out the innards and preparing him for burial.
That would definitely in the process.
Yes, it would.
So even as late in some of the third world countries, there's been stories where in some parts of rural Mexico where they were burying a kid because they thought they were dead and they sat up during the wake. I mean, I feel sorry for that family. Can you imagine that?
Well, I mean, it happened to me my third freshman year in college.
All right, Nick. All right, so I do got to ask: do highborn vampires do they drink with their pinky up? Because do we got to give them for their
They're
English?
very gracious about the whole thing.
Okay.
Very
Or do they
polite.
lift the pinky of their meal since they don't have a cup? I don't know.
No, you got to drink in a cup.
So vampires, obviously, in historic times, if they, want to hide where they are, they can move around. They can become the kid of their original selves to hide the fact that they're not aging and dying. How do you get around that in modern times where there's cameras everywhere, where there's internet, where records are permanent? Like, I can't imagine hiding would be easy in the modern world.
Well, a lot of times the mythos is that vampires can't see their reflection, and this carries across to cameras and other such things. And it's not that hard if you've been around for a while and you have amassed a fortune to hire somebody like Stabby, who is an internet whiz, and fixing internet records not actually all that hard if you know what you're doing. So there's a lot of ways to get around the tech.
I took a similar approach in my latest series, which is in one of the premises of Blood Knight Vampire Slayer, is that vampires basically rule the significant elements of the world, including social media, including a lot of media depictions of themselves. And when you basically own the internet, you have complete control over how you're depicted. Well, not only just the internet, you have complete control over how you're depicted in media in general. And so that's one way I sort of jumped around that part of the mythos.
Okay, that proves everything we knew. Zuckerberg was a vampire. Just saying.
But this is always an interesting thing in writing paranormal in general, is that if you go back 20 years when Buffy the Vampire Slayer was on television, and I was recently rewatching these, and you watch it and you go, about 75% of their problems would have been solved with a cell phone. But they didn't have smartphones, and so you were able to have distance. You were able to have, we're out of contact with each other. You're able to have, nobody's putting all of this weird crap on the internet that would immediately jump in with those kinds of things. So a world with cell phones and immediate access and TikTok and all that kind of thing becomes an interesting one to try to write in, because you either have to keep, because you either get the magic is side by side with the real world and they're not supposed to cross, or you get at some point the magic has to come out, and writing that is really interesting and really hard because human beings are nuts. And do you want to write the war story when they're all fighting, or you do the Alana Andrews thing where they're like, yep, magic came out, 30 years of chaos happened, and now this is what the new thing is. So technology really does make writing all of the paranormal stuff more of a challenge, because you have to think, how do they get around those dumb phones?
So I've always heard that the reason that vampires couldn't be seen on mirrors was because it was from an era where mirrors were backed in silver, so they would be reflective. So if you got modern mirrors, there's nothing silver in modern mirrors. It's too valuable of a commodity to use. So in theory, modern vampires would be seen on modern cameras and modern mirrors.
Yeah, no, the modern tech not being able to photograph vampires is one that I haven't seen perpetuated, that they do use the silver. But I look at the jokes about Keith Richards and like that, where does it really matter if you can go find a picture who looks exactly like this guy from 1700?
Oh, that's true.
Because people don't really take it seriously. It's just a good joke. So as long as you can separate enough by geography and by social circle, you can get away with stuff for a long time, as long as people don't really, really care.
Unless you need credentials, because if you're going to school, that's harder. You know what I mean? If you need credentials because, your day job when you're not drinking blood is, I don't know, you're a doctor or something. Well, then people would remember if you didn't go to school with them. I mean, there's not that many in every class.
Well, I mean, we have evidence that people can fake going to college pretty well right now.
Go on.
We just have some prime examples wandering around. Yeah.
Fair. All right, we'll move on.
And we all use the hand wavium and say fake ID, fake ID. We're good. We're good.
Oh yeah, I wrote a short story not too long ago that has a entire fake court in downtown Boston, and I put a vampire in it for fun because I wanted to. And so they have magic too, and they can just manipulate whatever they want to.
Glamours, okay.
It's fun. It's fine.
Did you mention glamours? Glamoring?
I did.
That's a traditional vampire trick. Like you could, I think it was an episode of Supernatural too. They just hold up this blank. It was blank, had nothing on it, but there was a glamour attached to it. It was a cursed object.
Psychic paper.
Psychic paper. And they're like, hey, yeah, whatever I tell you, you are going to see this on that paper. So if we're dealing with magic and monsters, and let's face it, vampires are a magic monster. At least that's how they're written. Why wouldn't they have psychic paper? I think it was Doctor Who. Was it Doctor Who?
It was Doctor Who, but the same kind of thing does happen where, these are not the droids you're looking for.
Wait, are Jedi vampires?
What was that?
Are Jedi vampires?
No. You see those in the light. So I guess that would be my
Don't
question.
upset me, JR.
So what do we require in our vampires? Because there's lots of different powers. There's lots of different weaknesses. Can they be daywalkers? Can't they? There's so many of these things, and that also changes some of the answers to that question, because if they can't hand wavium, if you're only seeing them at night, I mean, you're taking night classes and internet versus having to worry about going to college in the day. I mean, once you dig into the powers and the weaknesses, you can start to explain just about anything.
I only took day classes in college because I know too much about vampires.
That explains everything.
So Do you have a preference then in whether vampires are the good guys or whether they can be the protagonist? Because I mean, they've gone. You've got the Twilight, and for all we like to make fun of it, much like there are certain bands people make fun of. I mean, it's popular for a reason. They got into the zeitgeist for a reason. Enough people.
Blink-182 is definitely vampires as a band.
I can believe that, but so. Do you have a preference of do the vampires are always the bad guys? You're looking at Bram Stoker's Dracula, or can they be the good guys, even though to live they must kill humans?
Well, no, they don't.
Dracula wasn't a bad guy.
Yes, he was.
No, he wasn't.
Explain.
No, I'll die on that hill.
You die on a lot of hills. You must be immortal yourself.
I know, and that's why it's going to be incorporated into the merch. It's going to have a character of me going, I'll die on that hill. And everyone that's ever seen this show and has listened to my dumbass voice for hundreds of episodes will be like, yeah, Nick would die on that hill because he's kind of dumb. But but Dracula's not a bad guy.
That is now the question for the audio side only, where we got to ask them a poll question. Is Dracula a good guy or bad guy?
Absolutely not. He was just a love-struck dude.
As for the question of are vampires good or evil, can they be the protagonist? The question is, it's more of the anti-hero. Does the story warrant an anti-hero in it? Because they are a bad person. They do kill and injure and attack people. However, if the antagonist is worse, then it's fine, because the antagonist is killing puppies, and the anti-hero is trying to save the puppies.
Mm-hmm. So I still think that goes back to the mythos you build up, because you get the Angel and Spike thing, where it was, do you have a soul or don't you? And when you had a soul, you were capable of being a good person. You were capable of choosing not to feed on people. You could use other sources, not as satisfying, but you could, and you could choose not to kill when you fed. So there's a mythos there where you can say, are they only a monster, a mindless monster? Because we see them as that in a lot of things. Going back to Alana Andrews, they're powered by necromancers, and the vampire itself is a monster. End of discussion. Not thinking, not all it does is feed. That's all it has going for it, is the desire to feed. She made them true monsters again. In a lot of romances, they are heroes because they are overcoming all of those instincts that say we have to kill, we have to feed, we have to be monsters. So again, it's what mythos are you building around them as far as the rules of, are they soulless, are they monsters, or can they fight that?
That moral complexity is one of my favorite things about vampires too, because while I generally do tend to love the monster vampires, I also like the ones who find themselves in a vampiric situation and are conflicted by it. Like an actual example that comes to mind, I just remembered that I had this. The primary reason why I picked up this book, The Blood is the Life.
Let me show you.
We were talking about, I think we mentioned this one earlier. My face suddenly filled the screen. Was that supposed to happen?
Yeah, I want to see the cover.
That was meant to happen. Just roll with it.
Yes, the entire concept is, well, the tagline is, what if a nice Jewish boy turned into a vampire? And that in itself is a conflict, because humans are not kosher, I don't think. And
No.
you gotta drink human blood
No.
to survive as a vampire while also being Jewish. And it's like, that in itself was interesting to me. I don't even think I read the blurb. I just read the tagline and picked it up for that. But I love the concept of the vampire who is a vampire but doesn't necessarily want to be, or doesn't necessarily or who doesn't want to feed on humans but also doesn't want to die, so they have to deal with it. But one thing I'll add also is that even though I love the conflicted vampire and I love the evil vampire, my single favorite vampire franchise, I guess at this point, is What We Do in the Shadows. And
we are friends, Heather.
Neither of those things, but it is so hilariously written that it just kind of defies all my vampire expectations, and I love it to death. We are blessed to live in a world where it got a movie in 4 seasons, or is it 5? I can't remember. I actually haven't watched the most recent one, but yeah.
I honestly think that if we're going to determine if a vampire is capable of being good or they're just bad, I think it really depends on what they went through in order to become a vampire. Because I imagine if you would have asked me, say, 10 years ago, Marissa, if you were turned into a vampire right now, would you be a good vampire or a bad vampire? I'd probably be like, I'd be a good vampire. I wouldn't feed on people. I'd find a cow somewhere or something. And now I'm starting to understand Dracula a lot more because I'd rather be in my castle on top of my mountain with my love left alone.
Mm-hmm.
And if you come on my property, I'm going to eat you.
Yep.
So really what it comes down to is just a 10-year span can totally change your way of thinking. And if you do look at Spike and you look at an Angel and you look at, even some of the vampires in Twilight on how they all became vampires, it was pretty brutal. It was pretty brutal, especially in the Twilight series, the blonde sister, I can't remember her name.
Rosalie.
Hers was brutal.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I would be such a bad vampire after that. I don't she calmed down a lot later. No, I'd have a bad attitude all the time. I could see her anger completely justified.
So you'd be basically.
Go ahead.
I was say basically you're saying you'd be Red Foreman as a vampire. I gotcha.
Nice.
All
right.
I'm saying is when it's that brutal and you're tortured, either prior to or during the turning, then yeah, I could see why you would want to turn off your humanity, why you wouldn't want to feel anymore. I completely understand it.
Okay. Chloe, you had something to say?
Yeah, no, one of the most interesting questions about vampires is that's how much you change in 10 years. How much are you going to freaking change in 100? What is a human being who is still young and strong and capable when they are 100 years old, when they are 150 years old? And that is such an interesting question to me.
And that question is why that's why I had a problem with the premise of Twilight. Like, if you're at that age, why the heck did you go to high school? Like, most of us were happy to get out of high school. Why would you hang out?
Jer, I have the answer to this. I'm 45 years old, and I'm sick of humanity's bullshit. You turn me into a vampire, I'm going 30 days of night. I'm ripping up souls. I am not even joking. I moved to a place where I could just be left the F alone because I'm tired of human bullshit. And I'm human, but you make me not human, I'm going to pray the night. I'm going to be the thing you tell stories around the campfire. I'm going to be an absolute devil. I aim to misbehave.
The immortality question is for similar reasons, simultaneously one of my most and least favorite things about vampires. Because on one end, the positive side is if you're an immortal, like you've said, you eventually live long enough that you just get annoyed with everything. And it can be somewhat cathartic to read about a vampire protagonist who is just annoyed with everything, because you as the reader probably are. But on the flip side, that makes it really hard for me to buy vampires in romance, especially if you've got a 100, 200-year-old vampire who's going after someone who is 20 or younger. Because I look at the way most humans interact with people younger than them. 20-year-olds are generally very annoyed with 10-year-olds. 30-year-olds generally get very annoyed with 20-year-olds, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems like the older you are, the more annoyed you get with people who are younger than you. And when you put that on a century-long scale, the annoyance must be tremendous. It only really vampires.
That's one of the things I like about vampires is that when they're young vampires, maybe they're 40 or 50 years old. They were turning their 20s, let's just say for that. And they find somebody that's in their mid-20s, maybe early 30s, some of the comparable life experiences that's not going to annoy the shit out of the vampire. They turn them and make them a companion. You saw that in Angel, I love that show. Angel's always better than Buffy. But you had to have Buffy to create Angel. So like the chicken and the egg thing. So you got Angel that was creating people with comparable life experiences that didn't annoy the shit out of them, and they had their bloodlust and they had their lack of soul and their sense of evil, blah, 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 whatever Joss Whedon was smoking at the time. And, and it kind of worked, and then he got his soul back, and he's like, oh, wait, you know what? This chick's annoying as shit, but that would never happen, because we're talking about fantasy. And there's it's a merger of fantasy when we're talking about vampires because of how it's written, because it's written more like a fantasy is more there's a monster aspect to it. There is, but it's mostly fantasy. Like, what if I could live forever? What if this character could live forever? And then we start dealing with those questions. Do I want a life mate that is 150 years younger than me? Probably not, because they don't have the same life experiences. What the hell would we talk about for eternity? Especially to get someone from Gen Z. Like, holy shit.
Hold on.
Like, they're going to be like, yeah, no cap, dog, for real. Like, drinking blood is dog water, bro. Like, I don't even know how to speak that freaking language. I'd probably stick to myself.
Hold on.
Unmute yourself.
Touch base on a couple things because he just dropped a load.
There was a lot there.
I'm just sit here and try to pinpoint a couple things. By the time you hit 200 years old, everybody in your family is dead. Let's just be honest. At that point, you probably stop caring about humanity anyway, because everybody you've ever known in life is dead. Unless you turn them, and then you're the asshole for turning your family.
I'm 45 years old. I like 9 people.
But hold on. But they do touch base in the Twilight as to why they went back to high school. The younger they start in the town, the longer they can stay there because of their looks. So I will say that. I've watched a ridiculous amount of teen drama vampire stuff, so I can talk with my stepdaughters. Vampire Diaries.
Sparkle.
Vampire Diaries. Legacies. Freaking Twilight. And what was the other one? The Originals. Also, I could talk to... So when my stepdaughters talk to me and they're like, oh my God, this episode right here and da-da-da-da. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I actually finally caught up with you guys. Sure. Stefan has a soul and then doesn't have a soul and then does have a soul and then doesn't have a soul. One second we're cheering for Stefan and the next second we're cheering for Klaus. Like, you're giving me a migraine at this point. But I think after 200 years, it's just at that point, it's like, hey, you're legal technically in the eyes of the law. So do what you got to do because you're 200 years old. There's nobody else around. That's your same age, unless you want to go and mess with the Dakota Fanning.
So real quick, before Nick has another heart attack from yelling about sparkling vampires, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man. We need more monster commercials, people. So if you're writing it, hit me up. We could slot you in, because right now we have literally one monster commercial and air that beautiful bean footage.
The government underestimated the outbreak. The best medicines couldn't stop it. Now, the dead are walking the streets, and they're hungry. Zombie Patient Zero is 9 tales of flesh-ripping, brain-splattering mayhem from Bayonet Books, the boldest name in action and horror anthologies. From deep space to luxury resorts, nowhere is safe. Zip up your hazmat suit and dare to find out how it all went wrong. Zombie Patient Zero, from the deranged minds that brought you Contact This and Storming Area 51. Pick up your copy today in paperback or Kindle.
I didn't pay him to say that about Bayonet books, but I really actually did. So we're going to roll with it. All right. Now that we've let Nick take a deep breath. Deep
You
breath.
should have heard that deep breath. It sounded like this.
So,
Why don't you let me take a deep breath? Don't give me shit.
all right. Now back to vampires. All right. So who wants to jump in first? Jana was typing some stuff.
I did type some stuff. So an interesting thing you see in a lot of vampire lore is the idea of torpor or a suspended animation where a very old vampire can go, you know something, I'm tired with where I'm at. I'm going to take a dirt nap for 50 years or 100 years or whatever and pop up in another generation. And that both gives him the start over again. And a lot of times is kind of a rejuvenation to jump back into this life thing. So there's a lot of ways around it. I do think it's an interesting one to write because the other problem we have, and we see this across a lot of media and with a lot of writers, none of us is 1,500 years old. We have no idea how somebody from that time really thinks. And so they tend to be very modernized really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And you just say they've lived for 1,500 years old and they've adjusted to the modern age and now they use this kind of thing because it's the way that I think. But then you go, a really old person would not think this way, would probably not chase a 16-year-old, would probably have different moral structures and that kind of thing. And it's not always well written. And I do love the stories where it is, where you get somebody who acknowledges that old is a thing and you're going to think differently. And I still desperately want to find something, and maybe I'll have to write it, where like it's a vampire that gets to the 1970s and goes, screw it, I'm not worrying about keeping up anymore. And so now he's in the 2030s and he's still wearing the disco pants and the whole 9 yards because he's just like, keeping up with fashion, keeping up with everything else is stupid. I have claimed my stake. This is who I am. Shove it. Because I could see myself doing that and going, I'm
absolutely
trying to keep up. The 80s were the best. I'm staking my claim there, and I'm just.
Oh, I would so be an 80s vampire if I could.
It's impossible.
I'm not even 40 yet, and I'm tired of keeping up with fashion and whatnot. So, like, I could totally.
Can you imagine being a vampire though?
Generation.
Like if you're sick of keeping up with the trends, there's just going to be a point where you're like, you know what? I'm wearing a ruffled shirt, and I'm going to have the blouse unbuttoned, so I can be comfortable, and maybe not like. I'm going to bring back Janko jeans because they're comfy and roomy and I don't have to do this shit. You know, I'm going to have this hodgepodge of like different periods of time. Yeah. You know, but like talking about what you're talking about, Jana, you know, there was a time, like, depending on when the vampire was made, where like you could court a 14, 15-year-old person and it was okay. It was acceptable. You know, now you go in the wood chipper because that's pedophilia and that's gross. But, you know, you get a 300, 400-year-old vampire that comes into play and he's like, hey, man, that 50-year-old actually looking pretty good. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to stake you so quick. So quick. Stay away from my daughter because I have a daughter that's 17 years old and I don't want no vampires messing with her. But I'll just leave it on. I want to be an 80s vampire. I want some near dark shit.
You can't be an 80s vampire as a girl, though, because I don't think they make Aquafina the same way anymore, the hairspray. You just can't do it.
You mean Aquanet?
No, Aquanet? Is it Aquanet? I thought it was Aquafina.
Yeah.
Use Aquanet.
Water.
No, Aquanet, man. Where the girls look like they ran into walls, and then when their hair like went flat with the bangs, they'd spray the shit out of it.
Wait. 80s was a mullet time for men, so I mean, we could bring that back.
Absolutely, we need a mullet vampire.
And sideburns.
Sideburns, that's right.
Oh my god, a redneck South Carolinian vampire with a mullet and mutton chops, and he drives a Firebird.
I smell an anthology.
I have enough on my plate, please. No.
Jinko jeans has me wanting to write like a 90s vampire.
I'm the rookie writer here. I'll write that down.
Jinko jeans, because imagine all the tools you could fit up in those things. Like they're huge.
Can you imagine like the 90s if you had those big baggy pants that were popular for like the Kurt Cobain emo crowd?
The Jinko jeans, man.
You could fit a sword up in there. You could go all Highlander on this.
Like you could fit an entire arsenal up those pants.
And then you wear
a 12-gauge shotgun.
All right. So, yes, vampires would have to, decide whether they wanted to keep up with the errors. But the more you don't, the more you stick out. It isn't the purpose to blend in. Something to think about. But we're going to pivot from the style because we need Nick to tone his heartbeat down just a little bit and let him recover. But what do you think about the trope where some vampires will eat animals instead, just so that way they don't have to cross those lines?
Terry gets to go first. She hasn't talked enough.
Absolutely.
I think that's totally legit. Humans can be vegetarians as well. What's the difference?
Are you really vegetarian if you're eating an animal, though?
It's the vampire equivalent of vegetarianism.
So a humanitarian, I guess. I don't know. I'm making that up.
Well, in Underworld, didn't they do synthetic blood after a while?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dealt with synthetic blood. I was just about to say True Blood dealt with that. And that was the whole premise of that series, is that they came to the light because True Blood was a thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are dark sides of that though too, because the villain in my latest, he specifically goes to animal shelters and gets pets.
It's not dogs.
Specifically
It's
to
not
drain
dogs,
them.
is it?
So it's not like he hunts at all. It's just he eats people's pets or potential pets.
So the problem
cats, right? At least tell me it's cats.
It's all of them.
Oh,
the problem with the blood bank though is anybody that knows anything about modern medicine knows they track the hell out of that crap. So if they keep getting robbed of blood, it's going to make it really hard to ride under the radar. People are going to be like, on the dark net, see, we got a vampire. And they'll start tracking them and finding them just by the blood disappearances.
Okay,
if you're smart,
Hamilton,
you would do it like Blade. If you were smart, you would do it like Blade. You'd get people to volunteer to come in to your club and donate blood, and then eventually turn them because that's what they want to be paid with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Laurel K. Hamilton did that too with the Anita Blake series, where they had blood banks that were specifically for the vampires. Volunteers came in and donated. They had a vampiric church where the whole point was eternal life eventually. So again, that becomes are they out or are they not? Mm-hmm. Because if you make them out, if you make them a part of society, then you start changing society rules in order to give way to, well, what is it they want? And people are willing to be paid for all sorts of things. Oh, yeah. Giving to a vampiric blood bank or being a donor if you want to have direct contact. For a lot of people, that would be a thrill. That would be something that they would say, sign me up. I will sign on the dotted line right now. Make sure they don't have any diseases and, now you're a buffet.
They touch base with that in Vampire Academy as well. You have the vampires who are going to school after dark. You have the Dampierres that protect them from, the red-eyed vampires that have lost their minds and went crazy and are trying to kill everybody. And then you have donors that they know what they're getting into. They sign up for it. They sign NDAs. They come into the school. They get a little bit of blood drained here and there. Then they get paid and they leave.
And a steak. Because, if you're going to drain that much blood, you give them something nice and iron dense and some good proteins. No cookies after that stuff.
No, you give them broccoli because that's got protein and you don't want to make them happy.
Oh.
She actually makes a comment in it. She goes, "Oh my God, so-and-so is here. She's my favorite. She's got a sweet aftertaste."
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So... Wow, sweet aftertaste. Okay. So with the one of the tools that you see sometimes with the vampires is they almost have that hypnotic effect where they can sort of mind wipe people. You don't remember me draining your blood. Ignore the fact that you have like the hickey with the pokey points in it. Is that a common trope, or do you think that's just accepted at this point? Think there's wiggle room for them not to have this ability?
You're talking about the glamour. The glamour's been used as a trope since Bram Stoker. It's become part of vampire lore. The glamour. You didn't get bit. I didn't drain you completely. I'm also not going to turn you, which was the original focus of this group, was the turning vampire versus the murdering vampire. Most of your vampire lore is to turn, you know. But there's also other instances where you don't turn them, like we see that in Interview with the Vampire, where there was a process. Like it just wasn't enough that I fed on you. I also have to feed you my blood. So I think that's an interesting thing to delve into.
Okay. So anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Carrie, go.
Well, I was going to say the whole, hypnotizing people thing was used to great effect in Dracula Dead and Loving It. That was one of my favorite comedy vampire movies.
Oh, with Leslie Nielsen?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that is so funny. We're watching that tonight.
I think that it's a very accepted trope, but I would actually say that I think it's fading. I think that a lot of the modern pop representation of vampires, they're either the rat vampires who are scuttling around and desperate to eat, and they're just eating monsters, or they're the romantic vampires who have forgotten that they ever knew how to do that, and they just don't. I mean, you got flying vampires, you got bat vampires, you got all of these powers that vampires have had that anymore they just dress well, and that's kind of their superpower.
Oh, the vampire I wrote into my short story totally has that power, and he uses it to his advantage.
Oh, Lestat becoming a rock star in Queen of the Damned? Oh my God. Like, that is the epitome of, like, I'm going to be charming, but I don't want to change my style. So I've noticed that rockers in the 90s are using leather and blouses with frill, and I'm going to rock that. You know, it's so awesome. That's one of my favorite movies.
I agree. As much as people lambasted that movie, I loved it.
Oh, it's in the top 5 of my
Agreed.
vampire movies that I love.
So do vampires have other powers that you think are common tropes?
How much time you got, buddy?
There are a lot.
Well, Nick, we're going to let other people talk for a few minutes. So we're going to make Terry and Nathan carry the conversation for just a little bit.
I muted until you called me out. And now I'm
It's true. It's all my fault.
I'd say going into bat form.
Okay.
I remember that way back in the Game Boy Advance Castlevania games. That was awesome.
Love Castlevania.
Now what?
For me, the first one that I saw was the Interview with the Vampire. Then it was the thing. It's like, wow, this is cool, because that was one of the first ones that where they aimed to make the character cool. Before, vampires were always the villain. You're always trying to stake them or flee from them or murder them, and then all of a sudden, now here's this character that you feel for him. He's eating rats in a gutter, and you're like, wow, that's And then my favorite vampire book of all time is actually the Jim Butcher series. But it's not necessarily the abilities, it's the society aspects of it that I like.
Go on.
Well, they have the different courts of it. There's the reds, the whites, the blacks. Blacks are kind of eradicated at that point. And then they make the red vampire court, which is your standard bloodsuckers, as the enemy. And then there's 10, 12 novels about just trying to defeat these bloody bastards. And it's not really the abilities, it's everything else that goes with it.
So, okay, Heather, what powers did you give the vampires in your novels?
The vampires in Blood Night. I'm trying to think. My brain. I'm getting distracted by the chat and all the vampire movies we're talking about. The Blood Night has a very heavily Dungeons and Dragons inspired magic system, and that extends to the vampires themselves. They have sort of D&D style spells that they can use. That is not limited to the vampires. But honestly, the primary way in which the primary thing that sets vampires apart in this series, other than the fact that they need blood to survive, is there a variation of the glamour that I mentioned earlier. Actually, I didn't mention it earlier. The reason why they are why they work so hard to get in charge of, say, social media and media in general, things that humans consume, is that they basically cash their glamour over media, so that in effect, anytime a person interacts with a movie or the internet, they have a glamour, or they basically project their glamour through it. So humans don't actually realize vampires exist in this world because they're effectively tricked into not believing that they exist on a massive scale. And so it's primarily the glamour, primarily the blood drinking. There is not much transformation in this lore. But yeah, those are my main two things.
I think difficult to kill goes way high on that list, because that lends itself immediately to, well, what do you do to kill them? And those are such a fascinating list. But outside of that enumerated list of methods, vampires are really hard to kill, and that makes them fun to fight off.
Oh yeah, like I believe the rule I went with in Blood Knight was that you basically have to take off their head. You don't, they don't really go with the staking rule, because I mean, first of all, most things die when you stake them in the heart. That's not a uniquely vampire thing. and vampires also, like, they, to a certain extent in this setting, they have regenerative abilities, and it's kind of hard to regenerate a spine once it's completely severed. And,
so would a vampire that was somewhere it was nuked with an atom bomb, say, would they be able to regenerate themselves, or are they pretty much gone?
Well, I mean, if they've been nuked by an atom bomb, their cells are gone.
Well, it depends on the lore. The early vampire lore, the way to kill a vampire was beheading and fire.
Oh.
So, like, if you nuke them with an atom bomb, well, yeah, you're getting hit with nuclear fire. You aren't coming back from that. You're not Wolverine. You haven't been written by the Marvel Universe.
And a lot of times the staking, again, depending on your mythos, was paralyzation. It didn't kill them. It held them still long enough that then you could behead them, stuff their mouths with garlic, do all those other kind of neat things without them,
hit them with silver,
trying to kill you. So that comes up a lot, that, you stake them, that makes them stop long enough that then you can do your next thing. And I've seen that in a couple of things where it was, scientists and Marines and that kind of thing, and they'd stake them and then take them off to do experiments on them, because once you've got them immobilized, you can do all sorts of neat things with vampire blood. But yeah, stronger, faster, really, really hard to kill, psychic powers, all sorts of
vampires. I would definitely take some V from a vampire.
So vampires, does the lore, I can't remember, are they the ones that are killed with silver bullets too, or is that werewolves?
No, those are part of the lore.
It depends.
Yeah. It depends on the lore. Silver used to be the go-to for any type of paranormal type creature. Werewolves, skinwalkers, vampires, mummies. Silver for some reason it's associated with the moon, and the moon always had the effect on some of these creatures. And if you look back at the lore, werewolves, vampires, they all come out at night. So it would make sense that something silver that's associated with the moon and their cycles and how they react to that would make sense.
I've also heard, and I forget where I heard it, that there are some mythos that say that the first vampire was Judas. And so the silver goes back to that 30 pieces of silver that he was paid.
Right.
Go Terry! Go Terry!
I know something! Oh my God!
If I'm not
that was John Carpenter's Vampires, where he actually brought that ancient mythos and he brought it to light, because that was the whole point. It was Judas was the original vampire with the 30 pieces of silver, and that's why he's affected by it.
If I'm not mistaken, silver has antibiotic properties when used medically. So using that as a purifying tool when you have unclean undead turns into a thematic element of something that they knew that silver is purifying to the body. So if you shoot something with silver and it dies, that was the bad guy.
That makes it really expensive, though, because at one point in time they taught us for urban warfare, you give them $1 worth because roughly 22 cents per bullet. 5, 2 to the chest, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. That gets really expensive if you're trying to do that on a vampire when there's silver bullets. I'm just like, I guess it's given 22 mil worth. I don't know.
Well, and silver's soft, so you're looking at alloys. You're looking at hollow points that you fill with silver nitrate. I mean, there's a lot of things. When you get into the weaponry you use against vampires, you can get really, really clever and really, really fun. Again, once you establish your mythos. I mean, Harry Dresden used a water gun full of holy water. He also used balloons at one point. I read a place where they had filled a sauna with holy water and then shoved them in, and they basically saunted to death in the holy water. So when you get into the weaponry, there's a lot of range for really, really fun things.
Well, Constantine blessed the sprinkler system, if I remember correctly.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Did anybody see that recently they dug up an adult and a child that they believe were actually buried as vampires? They were locked up, chained up with the stake through the chest, and when they dug them up, it was their bones with the stake and the locks and chains.
Mm-hmm.
I have not read that, but it wouldn't surprise me. People are superstitious.
So my question is, if the world is not crazy enough as it is right now, why would they unlock the locks? Because that was the first thing they did.
Sheer dumb curiosity. Yep. Or a death wish. That could be it too.
Or the plot of your next novel, people. Get with us. All right. So, Chloe, before I ask the next question, you were going to say something before Nick got really, really passionate tonight.
Nope, I got there. Silver is surgical.
All right. So one of the common themes that you see in a lot of the vampire lore is they can't come in unless invited in. Do you think that's an absolute, or is that the canon dependent?
I think
I don't think it's an absolute, but it's certainly an interesting part of the lore. I've never used it myself, but it is something that it's I don't even know the mythology behind it, but I just find it oddly interesting.
Yeah. No, there's an I think it's a New England thing where they put a wall right behind the front door because there was a belief that the restless spirits or demons or whatever the local specifics were could only go in a straight line.
Huh.
So as long as there was a wall right inside the door, you couldn't get through it. And I think it's that same family of there are rules about your house that the bad things have to follow. And as long as you set the house upright, you keep all of these bad things out. The spirits and the demons and vampires just fly right along with the demons.
And some of that goes along with the sorry, JR.
You're fine.
But it's the 10 plagues in Moses. It's the painting of the lintel. It's the Jewish tradition of the prayer on the door. It's all of those things that create your hearth and your home, and that is power in and of itself. Dresden covers this really nicely, where all magical things have problems crossing that kind of boundary, and the less of a home that it is, so apartments, stores, things like that, where there aren't people living and growing and thriving there and feeding that energy, then his creatures can just walk through. And I really liked that idea that no, it's not going to be a problem for a vampire to walk into an office building. But if you go to my grandma's house that's been in the family for centuries, and the family has been born there, and there's memories there, and there's the magic of what is living, that's a really powerful thing against the undead. And then you put that religious thing of what the power of a lintel that's been blessed with blood, that's been blessed with prayer, that's been blessed with those, you really can't, steer too far away from that without seeing that whole thing about why they can't cross, especially if you're in they're evil or innately have some kind of an evil to them.
To touch base on what... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, one of my favorite uses of that trope, if I'm remembering it correctly, is from Larry Correa's Monster Hunter International. And there's a point where the monster hunters are going to this house, and the people in it have very clearly been murdered by vampires, and they're trying to figure out exactly how, because it happened in the middle of the night, and there was no way the vampires could have been invited in. And then they look around, and there's a welcome mat. And the welcome mat basically counts as an invitation in, and it's like, oh, suddenly welcome mats are a very dangerous thing in this setting. And I thought that was pretty cool.
So I was just going to I was just going to touch base on that actually, because I saw JR drop that and I was like, so out of me and Nick, I am the more superstitious one. I throw, spelt salt over my shoulder, and I don't put hats or purses on the floor or on the bed. And like, I'm definitely the superstitious one. So when we moved into the new house, I was like, man, it gets so muddy out here. We need a front door mat. And so, we were looking through Amazon and I was like, it can't say welcome. And so we scrolled and it took us about 3 days of scrolling through Amazon before I finally found the right one. And our welcome mat does not say welcome. It says come back with a warrant. So
I have one that says, but did you knock?
Nice.
Nobody's allowed in this house. I'm telling you. It doesn't matter if you're alive or undead. You better come back with a warrant.
There's one that I've seen that basically says "Go away, we're introverts" on it.
I've also seen some that said totally not a trapdoor.
Oh, good one.
Ooh, the mimics. So one of the topics that I thought would be interesting to cover is the concept of how religion and religiosity mixes with like vampire lore. So you have obviously the holy water. You have they can't go on holy grounds. What happens if the person who gets turned was deeply religious? Does it mean their soul was damned? How do you prefer it, and what do you see a lot of on the tropes where the intersection of the two?
Well, those tropes are defined in Catholicism or Christianity. The holy ground, the hallowed ground. You start dealing with things like, because there are movies with Jewish vampires.
Mm-hmm.
There's movies out there with Muslim vampires. So, like, the trope is weird because it depends on how the writer based the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what we're basing everything on, is the rules. Like, so if it's a Catholic writer, it's a Christian writer, it's a Muslim writer, it's a Muslim writer, Jewish writer, whatever, that's the rule set they're going to use, and they might play into some of the other religions, but we're dealing with the deep dark, we're dealing with creepy crawlies, we're dealing with monsters that shouldn't exist anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But
So
you have to create the rule set.
I feel like to a certain extent, well, I wouldn't say that the religious element is necessary to the genre, but it certainly has, it certainly deserves a place in it, because the thing about it is, one of the huge things about vampires is the question of whether they have a soul or not, and nothing deals with the soul more than religion. And I feel like those are two very important, like they echo each other very well thematically. Now, not to say that I think there are certainly excellent vampire stories that don't feature religion.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you're trying to write I think the strongest vampire lores tend to involve it because of that dichotomy.
Mm-hmm. The book I'm writing.
Yeah, like if you get an atheist vampire, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, but is it their belief or is it the belief of the person? Because
that's
I'm working with one, and the hunters, it's not what religion you follow, it's what do you believe in? Where does your faith lie? And so at one point it talks about, they're all wearing necklaces, and for one it's the Star of David, for another it's a cross, for the third one it's the first bullet that ever hit him and he didn't die, and it hangs on his thing. And the gal who's in charge, it's just a silver chain, because the thing she has the best faith in is in herself. And she believes that there's something greater out there, but she has no idea what it is, and she has a rocky relationship with it. So that there's not a religion there, but there's an absolute sense of belief and of faith. And so is it the religion? Is it the rules of it? Or is it the faith in that thing?
It's ultimately what is true in the world, which is completely up to the discretion of the author. And that's, authors aren't supposed to show up in books as characters. Authors are supposed to be the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that the reason religion turns up so often is because we're dealing with issues of purity. and how do you drive impurity and darkness out of the world? And one of the natural paths that human stories have turned to is you drive impurity and darkness out of the world with your religion, with your faith, with truth. And so Catholicism is such an easy one because it has so many symbols and so much mythology built into their stories that you can borrow from that, and it just fits really neatly and has lots of images. But it works with just about any religion dealing with truth and purity.
Well, I think that falls back onto the rules of the creator or the author. That whoever writes these tales establishes the rule set, right? To which their characters are going to abide or try and, go against the rules. So you got some I'll have to look this up, but there's probably some atheist authors that wrote vampires where they're not confined to those rules of religion. So I think the guy that wrote 30 Days of Night is pretty much that guy or girl. I don't know. I have to look it up. But 30 Days of Night, they're not really affected by anything other than beheading and fire, because those are things that will naturally destroy a body. And they're not trying to turn people. They're just trying to feed.
So moving on, Nick, you had something, or Nathan, you had something to say? You got to unmute.
No, every time I have something to say, someone else does it, so it's all good.
Yeah, we got to give a few volumes to Nick before we talk about his favorite topics. I should have known better. This is my fault. I didn't airmail the volume.
He is currently roboting, so
yeah, it's Starlink is actually trying to mute him for us. They reached down from the heavens, and they're like, "Hey, Nick, chill." So one of the things I find fascinating about the concept of holy ground as one of the determining factors, if you do that, where do you draw the line at holy ground? Because I would almost guarantee any spot on the planet Earth at one point was a holy site for somebody. So where do you draw the line? And you see some of that. I mean, this is an immortal thing, not a vampire thing, but with tropes overline. You saw some of that in the Highlander where they couldn't cut people's head off in holy grounds, and they'd go to this like one weird spot in the forest that no one remembered. Like at a certain point in time, like you run out of places.
I think it's where you have somebody to hold it. I think that the absolutism of it is absurd, as you clearly point out. But as long as there's somebody there to hold it, and sometimes a monument is capable of that if that monument is important enough and has enough power stored up in it through history. But mostly it's the people.
They touch base on it in The Nun. If any of you guys like scary movies, it's part of the Conjuring universe. See Jana shaking her head over there. But in the movie The Nun, and trust me, it scared me. And you guys all know I'm the queen of horror, but I'm also Catholic. So seeing a demon nun kind of like, I was freaking out myself. I walked out of the movie theater. It took me 3 tries to watch it all the way through. But once I did watch it through, the abbey that they were in was an abbey with the Sisters of Perpetual Prayer. As long as the sisters were there, as long as they were in perpetual prayer, as soon as one stopped, another one had begun, like it kept the demon at bay. As soon as the last sister was gone, as soon as it got to the last sister and she was gone, all heck broke loose. And it was the act of bringing somebody not of the church, into the abbey, that helped that demon escape the abbey. And because the protagonist in that movie was a priest, a nun that hadn't taken her vespers yet, and Frenchie, who was the town man whore, and it grabbed on Frenchie and it made its way out of the abbey in Romania to France, to Canada, and then eventually to America. And it worked its way through the thing, all because that one person that was not ordained was able to grab it. And but I liked the way that they touched base on the whole holy ground thing. It was holy until the point that it wasn't anymore. But
yeah, the grounds can be corrupted.
yeah. So the only other thing I was going to say is if you ever want to start a fun conversation and get yourself kicked out of Sunday school, I may have at 6 years old brought up the fact that I believe that Jesus was a zombie. He died, he came back to life. As you can hear my husband yelling, he believes that he was a lich, but one of my best friends in Sunday school believed he was a vampire. So if Jesus is a vampire, what is holy ground?
And now you know why we get all the hate mail to Madam Stabby Stab over on the Instagram, Twitter, and email. All right, so Chloe, you've been a little bit quiet lately. Weigh in. Turn this conversation around for us.
Well, we were talking about holy ground and people holding that holy ground, and it makes for interesting threshold conversations when you mix what is a holy place with why can't you go through and is a home a holy place in the same way that a church ground would be. And I think that the graveyards make for some of the most interesting undead stories because you've got your nighttime aspect and you've got all of that. But those are your holy grounds too. So you got to pick your poison as you're setting up your lore. It's not one that I particularly follow. I've done vampires and I like largely unlimited vampires that don't have to go through all of the ritualistic pieces of it because just letting the story run is a little bit more modern and it's a little bit more fun, where the horror aspect of it really gets into the systematic rules of preventing vampires and dealing with vampires and all of that, where I think that the romantic vampires just don't really need it to work as well as they do.
Okay.
What I love about graveyards and supernatural beings is ghouls. I love ghouls.
Thanks. So, one of the things we talked about was when we start getting vampires that are ageless, they would potentially think differently, much like, if they're from different eras, they would think and speak. Now, you could argue that they're speaking when modernized as they exist with the evolution, because language is constantly evolving. I have no problem with vampires that are 1,000 years old living in modern times talking like the kids, right? Like, they've got Urban Dictionary just like we do, right? But I would imagine at some level their core self would think differently. Do you guys have examples where authors really nailed it? Nick, you've already weighed in on this one, so we're going to let everyone else. So, does anyone else have examples where they really nailed that?
I think if you look at Interview with a Vampire, they have a sense of history to them, and especially the child vampire thinks like adult and moves like an adult, but still has an immaturity based on the world that she grew up in and the reality that she dealt with as a child, even if she doesn't remember it. And I think that is really well thought out and really well played. I think Anne Rice is one of those original queens of vampires who really did think that stuff through.
Well, then that would mean that not just how long they've been alive, but so, everybody wasn't the same in the 1700s. Were they a peasant or were they highborn when they were alive in the 1700s would also factor in based on that example. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right.
And to make myself feel better about the whole thing, when I watch vampire stories, I just assume that vampires stop emotionally maturing when they transfer from human to vampire. And it just makes me feel so much happier about the whole situation. If they're 17, they're allowed to continue to think and act like a 17-year-old, and their peers continue to be 17-year-olds. And that's okay. And now we can enjoy the romances again.
I actually really like that approach. Like it solves a lot of problems I have with certain elements of vampire lore with regards to their age.
See, and that's more horrific to me. I would never want to be stuck at 17 forever because we are morons at 17. And that was the point of Tuck Everlasting, which it's not a vampire story, but it is a story about immortals. And what happens when you are stuck in that situation forever. And a lot of our stories wouldn't work as well that way because the emotional maturity in romance is part of what makes this interesting, is this idea that you have, I'm going to pull on Edward, and I know how you feel about Twilight, Nick, but the reason that there's that appeal there is he's a Byronic hero. He's so much older than her. He's got this level of maturity and all these kinds of things. And he is stepping in to guard and protect and guide. And there's a thing about that that is really appealing to certain readerships. And it's part of why it had the following that it did, because it is this old style classic hero pulling from that Byronic era. And you get a lot of that with the
It
vampires where it's
is.
like, because of their age, because of their insight, they are a very specific kind of hero and anti-hero when used in a romantic sense.
I think that Twilight specifically, I don't see the maturity. I just see the power imbalance that calls for, because they act like teenagers and they have the petty squabbles and the inability to forgive, and all of the stuff that comes with it. Maturity is just dead. It is a teenage romance novel. Somebody had to explain that to me after I read it, and I was like, oh, the structure is a romance, isn't it? I totally missed that. Totally.
But they did.
The problem I have with that, oh, well, they just stopped maturing, is I have met 17-year-olds that were functionally mature because of their life experiences. So I don't think just saying, oh, they think like a 17-year-old means they can't be mature. I mean, like I deployed with guys who literally turned 18 on the plane to Iraq, and I would put them against some of the 30-year-olds that were in my unit in their level of maturity. I think
There's a
infantilizing
natural range to it, but when you look at the human biology involved, there is, because your 17-year-old who's super mature is also going to be extraordinarily mature at 30. Their maturation process is partially supported by life experience. It's also partially supported by biology, and you can yeah.
So I was leaning more towards the life experience, because, like, you know, if you're sheltered, you know, the little spoiled rich kid whose daddy never told him no is going to have a different outlook on the world than the guy that grew up hardscrabble, fighting in the streets to live, you know, having to con their way into every meal. Like, I think that plays a factor, and I don't think it's limited by age. But there is something to what you're mentioning about maturity with the brain still developing until I think 25.
But they do touch base on the whole child vampire thing in the Twilight series, later in the Twilight series, but they do touch base on it when the elders come from Italy and they find baby vampires, like 2 and 3-year-old vampires, because a family didn't want to lose their child. And they straight up yeeted them into bonfires, man. They didn't play with baby vampires.
Which comes to the structure. How your vampiric society works is also going to play tightly into that, because if you've got a vampiric society that they look at that and go, if they're stuck at 17, that means the likelihood of them doing something stupid, and this again comes down to, are they out or are they not? If you've got a secret society, if I want everyone in the world to know my secret, I know exactly who to tell. And you know, she's about 14 and lives next door, and she will tell absolutely everybody. So if she became a vampire and had that 14-year-old mentality, it would be on the news. It would be all over TikTok by the end of the day. And so you would also have to say, how does the hierarchy work, and how do they view that? Would turning someone into a vamp that was under the age of 35 be an immediate cause to kill him off, because that immaturity could lead to trouble? So it is an interesting question if you freeze them. And you know, all of these, always the society thing comes up, because that's a lot of, you know, who's your sire, who's your things like that. The society is important, and that ties into where do we lock them in?
No, I agree with you, but the problem is that in like film media, you have this 17-year-old person that's really 24 to 35. They look more mature than they really are. Like, in today's society, if I saw a vampire, just a regular human being going after a 17-year-old that's in their 30s, I'm probably going to have issue with that. I know I'm going to have issue with that. I'm probably going to hurt you. But, you know, it's like we have these you have these romanticized versions in literature where we describe that there's this ancient vampire, highborn, and by the way, highborns were never human. I'll die on that hill also. Your highborns were never human. They were always vampires. They were born by vampires and they grew up as vampires. So in the literary sense, when we write about vampires, we should probably be a little bit more responsible in the fact that most of your vampires that are going after anybody, they're going to be in their 30s. At least they're going to look like they're in their 30s, you know. And then them going after a 17-year-old girl out of Southeast Seattle, you know, Stephanie Myers, I freaking hate you. You destroyed vampires, and I'll die on that hill too. So
You
that's
die on
another
a lot of
shirt.
hills. You must be a mortal vampire yourself. So
yeah, I'm a 45-year-old vampire that's sick of everybody's shit, especially Stephanie Myers, who ruined the vampire genre.
All right, Nick,
They
deep
don't
breaths.
sparkle.
Nick, calm down. Deep breaths.
All right, I'm good. I'm gonna mute myself. You guys can talk. I just like Stephanie Myers. Just
All right, so I've seen in some lores where they specifically, like you mentioned, Jenna, and I think maybe Terry, about they had rules about turning people too young. And I've seen, I can't remember what movie it was, where they actually turned a 10-year-old, and that became a whole thing where they had to take him out to the woods to kill him because they weren't ready for that amount of power physically, and there was danger there. You were talking about how they hide in plain sight, and I'm reminded, I don't know if any of you guys are huge Stargate, like Nick does Star Wars. For me, it was always Stargate. They had one scene where they were trying to hide the Stargate program, so they hired a PR company to write a TV series about the program so no one would believe it, right? Like, I'm wondering if you could use that trope, like Heather, you talked about a little bit. You could have them set this up, so now when people talk about it, like, oh yeah, you're one of those crazies, right? That could be an interesting concept for a vampire story, to let them hide in plain sight.
Well, and choosing your locations, places like Narlands, that's part of why my series is set there, is because weird crap happens there all the time. Nobody blinks an eyelash. And if you were to come out and say I'm a vampire, they'd go, yep, me too. We're good. You know, it is not a big deal, because the legends and the lore there is so seeped in all of that it's not a big deal. I did the ghost tour there, and they take you along and they go, and this right here is a 3-story place of the vampire who did this, that, and the other. And this over here, this is the convent de Ursulines, and there are silver nails in the shutters, and we don't know what it's to keep in or to keep out, but there are coffins upstairs. They go through all of these, and so you go to certain locations, and that would also make it. Ooh, there we go. I'm an English major. That would also make it really easy to hide in plain sight, because some places are just fully into it, man. They don't care.
So, first off, if you are a historian in any level of training or amateur skill, do not go on those ghost tours. They don't understand the basics of history or historiography. That would be a hill I might actually die on. I was a docent. I gave some of those talks, and I listened to what my instructors were telling me. Yeah, they didn't read a history book. So don't assume just because they tell you that they're experts on history.
They know stories. They know stories, and that's the part that you latch onto.
Sure. Yeah, we could go with that. I think it's location matters, but you mentioned they were already down with it in New Orleans with the level of weird. So I've seen some of the tropes where the vampires were what they call psychic vampires, and they don't drink your blood, they suck your aura. Do you count that as part of the vampire lore, or would you consider that something else, another?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the lore. I have experienced that myself.
You paid your taxes too?
Well, no, I've given tours also. And when you have the audience listening to you and engaged with you, and they are giving you that attention energy, you can suck that up, and you are just feeling alive. Spoilers of a vampire.
There we go.
Jim Butcher actually does that in his novel. That's The White Court, which is why the White Court vampires, most of them are porn stars. Because that's what they're sucking up. They're sucking up that ore, whereas Red Court are going after your blood. The White Court's not the enemy, the Red Court is.
Yeah, that's used to great effect in the What We Do in the Shadows TV show as well, because you have the character of Colin Robinson, who he is just the most like milquetoast boring person, and uses that to basically suck out people's energy. He intentionally, for example, goes to town hall meetings and gives the most boring possible speech. And because it's a lot of people gathered in one place, it's like a quick power feed, you know. And he's one of those characters where I would find him incredibly boring in any other situation, but because of the way he works within the ensemble cast, he's one of the most hilarious characters in that series, which is saying something because that's just a generally hilarious show.
Intentionally hilarious or just unironically kind of?
He's absolutely like genuinely hilarious.
Okay. I am generally very laissez-faire with do what you want to do with the mythologies surrounding old ideas and even new ideas. I don't care. Writers ought to do what they want and see whether or not they can get away with it. But this one is the one where I draw the line for my vampires. The idea of a vampire being something that consumes other than blood. We are not talking vampires anymore. We are talking something else. And I will make up a name and I will write that sucker, but it's not a vampire.
Well, I guess a succubus of some sort, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of that in between the vampire, the succubus. I think but I think it's very hard to have that kind of vampire be a main lead. I was thinking through media like Nathan was, and I'm like, I have seen several versions where there is a court, there is some derivation from the normal that is a vampire that feeds on life force, that feeds on psychic and that kind of thing, but they're generally not that main vampire. That main thing tends to fit into the we feed on blood, and then you get these as offshoots that do other things. And so I wonder if that's part of that, is that we really do expect the feeding on blood as what a vampire does, but we'll accept these alternates, but not necessarily as the lead.
That's exactly the white cord in Jim Butcher. Mine goes blank with the name of the character, but he was a roommate
Thomas.
Yes.
Well done.
And that was the thing, is he's a white cord vampire that would suck up that aura, but he's not the main baddie. The main baddie is this red court one that takes over his girlfriend. Spoilers. and that's how that works out, is you have the main baddies is the one that's going after the blood. And if you look at the mythology of vampires, it's the same thing. It's always blood.
Okay.
Usually the other is a succubus or an incubus, and so you have to figure out where that would fit otherwise.
I wrote a demon that consumed creative energy. He was a kingmaker in a creative enclave, and what he chose was what sold, and everybody would bring him all of their offerings to try to get themselves chosen. I love that concept. I love that structure. I just can't make that into a vampire in my books.
It's Fae. It's a lot more Fae than it is vampire, because you see that in the Fae a lot, that they feed off of dreams, that they feed off of all of creativity, those other things. That's much more a Fae sphere than it is the vampires. Vampires are more visceral.
All right. Well, Stabby asked, by that definition, would leeches, however you say that, we be considered vampires then at that point?
I thought she meant slugs. So, as a leech,
Nick got a
funny question. I like it.
Nick got a phone call from work, so she can't unmute right now.
No, I don't think leeches, mosquitoes, ticks, fleas, and other things that suck blood as insects, they don't work for me as a vampire.
But it would be really fun to write a vampire who kind of identified with them, wouldn't it?
Identification, absolutely.
Well, then, if having vampire blood in you is what can turn you, could a mosquito that bit a vampire and then bit you, it transmitted the blood?
This is a Thor's hammer question. I'm not gonna answer it.
Nope.
This is a
what?
what?
I always like the more
Thor's
complication
hammer.
to the turning.
What's the Thor's hammer question? I'm not familiar with that.
Can the elevator go up if Thor's hammer is in it?
Is the elevator
No, it's too heavy.
Thor's hammer question, and I will not participate in this game.
Okay. All right, dear listener, you can weigh in the comments down below when we share this episode. Tell me what you think. Ooh, and vampire bats. There you go. Stabby coming in with the miming. So well done. We'll get you your certificate of completion for the mimology school.
Can you prove the vampire bat is not a vampire?
No. That is one of the tropes you don't see as much anymore, is the vampires turning into bats that you used to see all the time.
Because it's one of my favorite vampire tropes. I love a good classic bat transformation.
One bat or many?
Both of them. I love them all.
Is that a Thor's hammer question too, Chloe?
I'm not going to live that one down, am I?
No, but it's cool. It's got me thinking now, and my son is a superhero fanatic, so I will have to ask him.
I mean, I could get picky about it, where it's like, well, if we're going to be picky about distribution of mass, then it would make more sense for them to split into multiple bats. But we're also talking about people splitting into bats. And I feel like at some point, science and that kind of logic stops playing a role.
Yeah, I tried to write shapeshifters with conservation of mass and conservation of fluid. That was a disaster.
Well, they would just get really long hair. Everyone would just get long hair. And then if you cut their hair, all Samson and Delilah, then they can't change back to their full self, because now they don't have the same mass. I have seen that in a story.
It's an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm.
I feel
like it's the kind of thing that's better used for short stories rather than novels and series, though, because in a short story, you have time to you don't really have to worry about the deeper implications. Whereas with a novel, you got to be like, dang it, how do I fix this problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
how do I keep it consistent? Yeah. Hand wavium.
Mm-hmm.
I love the classic Bugs Bunny episode where he gets to the vampire and it's I am a bat. I'm also a bat. Whack. So there is some humor to be pulled with the bat thing. I just think part of the problem is that, again, when we went with vampires being sexy, bats generally scare people and are not seen as a sexy. And for a while, there was some stories out there that had a wolf as an alternative form, but it's like, but that's what werewolves do. And so it was confusing and people stopped writing it. But they were looking for the idea of still being a shapeshifter, but something that was not, bats that they thought, well, they spread disease, they this, that, and the other. There's, bats need better representation. And that was no longer a thing once we started really going with the sexy vampires, the traditional sexy romance heroes versus the monsters.
There's a certain man who lives in Gotham who says bats are pretty cool.
But he doesn't turn into one, man.
They're scary.
Not yet, that you know of. Give him a week. So what about, how do you guys feel like the vampire hunters fit into vampire lore? Is that a requirement, you think, a yin to the yang?
That is another podcast.
All right, I will make that note. Vampire hunters.
Make it another podcast, because I could talk about vampire hunters forever.
Done.
I do not have enough time for this.
Yeah, it is an hour and a half, and I know I promised Heather we could let her get to bed at a reasonable hour. So instead, we're gonna wrap this up. I will write. In fact, let me make a note of that real quick. Vampire Hunter. We'll make that another podcast. But Terry, what are you writing right now, and what are you narrating?
So right now I am narrating 2 urban fantasy stories. Hopefully get those done in the next month or 2. I'm also writing drafting the 3rd book of my first fantasy trilogy and seeing what my characters do this time that I don't expect. They keep doing that.
It's weird that way. All right. What about you, Janet? What are you writing in your mini personalities?
My many personalities. Well, my romance personality is working on a billionaire romance. It does not have any vampires in it. But Jenna Ray is writing a vampire hunter book that I've been working on for a little while, and I'm finally down to about the last third of it. So I'm hoping to put that out. I've done several short stories about these characters and had them in various urban fantasy books. So I'm going to pull that all together and start putting out the novels. And I'm very excited because these are some of my very, very favorite characters.
Okay. What about you, Eddie Sky and HP Hollow?
All right. Well, in terms of things I'm working on right now, I am starting off a new series called Monster Girl Tamer, which is a lit RPG fantasy adventure. It kind of has a Monster Hunter Capcom vibe to it. But basically, main character is a chosen one who is destined to collect a harem of hot monster girls and save the world. So it's absolute lit RPG silliness. But in terms of, I've got 2 more chapters to write on that, and then I am going to be editing book 2 of Blood Knight. and which is yay vampires. So those are my projects for now.
Is the Monster Girl harem one that you mentioned, is that going to be as Heather or as Madam Sky?
That is actually a quote unquote collaboration because it's as HP Hollow, I wrote a series called Monster Punk Horizon, which was just straight up fun adventure, no romance whatsoever in it. And when I wrote Titan Mage, readers started asking me for Monster Girl stories. It's a really popular subgenre in male-oriented harem stories. And I couldn't fit Monster Girls into the Titan Mage universe as I'd set it up, but I looked at Monster Punk Horizon and was like, you know what? This world is already well set up for a Monster Girl style series. So I'm writing it officially under the Edie Sky pen name because there's like 3 sex scenes in it, which is not a thing that happens on my HP Hollow pen name. But I'm still connecting it with the HP Hollow pen name to make it to make it clearer that it is part of that universe, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So the covers have similar graphic design and stuff.
So this is an important question. When you're collaborating with yourself, as yourself, but not yourself, do you talk to yourself? And if so, who answers?
All the time, and we yell at each other quite frequently.
This is outstanding. So as someone who also talks to yourself, and give you a little bit of advice. If you keep the little earpiece that you have for your cell phone in when you're in public, people will just assume you're on the phone. And now they won't call the people with the nets to come get you.
This is a technique I have used before.
This is why we are friends, Heather. This is why we are friends. All right, Nathan, what are you working on right now?
The question is, what am I not working on? Besides writing all the 1,000 anthologies that you guys keep on suggesting, because GR, I have to be in all of them. I'm working on a novella series called The Hellcats in my Beyond Terra Continuum world, and it's basically take Cowboy Bebop and John Wick and mash them together, and that's what you have.
You
a little bit of fire, the good parts of Firefly.
Wait. You're implying there are bad parts of Firefly, sir, and I will not have that kind of shenanigans on my show.
That is an English word. I'm just looking at Nick. I'm also working on a fantasy. I don't have a name for the series yet. It's I call it my medieval mecha. It's basically mechs in a fantasy world with magic.
Yes!
Golems. Yeah. I'm just saying. Was it Steve Diamond and Larry Correa did that with? Oh, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the series.
Servants of War? Was that it?
Servants of War. Yeah.
I basically took the anime Escaflowne and went, I bet you I could do better.
That's cool.
That was the exact premise of Titan Mage for me. Heck yes, I'm giving you a high five across the internet. There we go.
There we go.
I am forever angry that Escaflowne did not join the pantheon of classic anime people remember, because it deserves so much more attention than it gets.
Yes,
I can talk endlessly about my world, and the stuff that I took from Escaflowne and the stuff that I rejected, but that's another story. Another podcast.
Absolutely. And I did, like I said, I promised Heather that we'd let her get her beauty sleep. So instead, we're going to let Madam Chloe. What are you writing right now?
I have actually just had a book come out in my Trials of the White Princess novella series, which is the story of the Rat King underground noble and his arranged wife and the strange relationship that they have. It's a Veridan subsection of my larger world, but I am writing the 7th book in that series, and the pixies are on the rampage and we're headed back up to the mountains, and it's delightful.
So first off, would they die on that hill?
Some of them certainly would.
So Nathan, what you're telling me is...
I gotta throw this in there real quick. Hold on, real quick. You called her Madam Chloe, so therefore, from here on out, every time Chloe comes on, she has to put Madam in front of her name. She has to be Madam Chloe.
You got it.
Done.
Did it. These are the rules. This is the way.
All right. She has spoken. So say we all. All right. So Nathan, what you're telling me is I shouldn't tell you that Three Ravens just uploaded a bunch more open calls for anthologies. So conspiracy theories, skunk work, secret government research projects, wild fae. I shouldn't tell you.
I need sleep sometime.
Delivery
Overrated.
driver by day, vampire author by night. All right, I got you.
Sleep is for the dead.
Well, I guess they're undead, so technically they're not the dead. So I guess vampires don't have to sleep then. Ooh, that's another topic we can discuss for round 3 about vampires. Is do they have to sleep in the coffin? We're definitely going to do another one. All right, Terry, how can listeners and readers at home and viewers and all the cool things, how can they find you on the wild interwebs?
I'm most commonly found on the Book of Face, sharing memes, occasionally pictures of cats, usually.
Pictures of cats are cool. Dogs are better, but, we won't fight. All right, Jana, the many faces of Jana S. Brown. How can listeners find you on the wild interwebs?
You can find me over at opalkingdompress.com, or if you look for Jana Ray around the internet, on Facebook, on all of the different things, you will probably be bumping into me. All the places.
Cool.
On the X.
Where can we find you, Eddie Sky and HP Hollow, on the wild interwebs?
All right, I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as either Edie Sky Author or Hollow Writing. And then similarly, you can find me at hollowwriting.com and ediesky.com.
I will say that I enjoyed your live stream you did recently with your husband about your recent Sky revolve, because you're talking about the series and he was blushing the whole time, and it was hilarious because he was blushing.
I was just about to say that because he was blushing the whole time. It was awesome.
Blushing in a bow tie. That could be your next romance novel, Blushing in a Bow Tie. There you go.
I like it.
That's my next hit single, Blushing in a Blow Tie. Bow tie. Blushing in a bow tie.
You get a bow tie, you got a blow tie.
The family-friendly rating just went out the window. All right, Nathan.
I love these people so fucking much.
Nick, breathe, people. We need Nathan to let us go home.
You brought my best friends on a panel, and you just, hilarity is going to ensue. It's going to happen. It's always Nick's fault. I got a banner for that. Hold on.
How can we find you online, Nathan?
I do have a defunct website that I never check anymore. I'm on Twitter occasionally, but most of it's Facebook.
All right, we will link all of that to the show notes below. He's a newer author, mostly in anthology, so he hasn't made his mark on the digital world yet. He's got time. Whatever you do, take whatever Nick's advice is about how to make the audience love you and go the other direction. He dies on a lot of hills. You don't want to die.
Our audience listens for me and my hot takes. I'm just saying.
Maybe. I would question sanity then. All right, Chloe, Madam Chloe.
You can find my long-form thoughts on various things about series and writing and stuff on my website, chloegarner.com. If you're looking for just one-directional news of what I've got going on and when I've got stuff going out, you can check out my newsletter. That's the best way to keep up with what I'm doing. And if you want to come and talk and hang out and hang out with some of the coolest people on Facebook, come join my Facebook group, and it's a fun place to be.
It's classy because they wouldn't let me in. I'm just saying.
Ooh, harsh.
All right. This is
let me in.
Oh man, I feel stabbed in the heart. Ooh, do you hear that? That's the sound of my soul escaping my body. All right. This is the part where I remind you, dear listener, to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books, and this is especially important for small presses, indie authors, and up-and-coming creatives, because sometimes that social proof is all they have to sell themselves to the world. And so you are helping get more stories you like when you review what you like, people. So do your part. We greatly appreciate it. And with that said, you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the Twitters, the email Blasters and Blades podcast at gmail.com. Again, for professional purposes only. Blasters and Blades podcast at gmail.com. We have our Facebook group and Facebook page. We have the map of all the hills that Nick Garber has died on. And finally, and most importantly, we have Madam Stabby Stab's Instagram, Twitter, and email, where you can send all of the hate mail. She might even read it to Nick if you're mad at him for his hot takes. Send it to her. She lives with him, so she can read it to him. And you can find us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. Blades, where you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink until the iced coffee pours out of Stabby's eyeballs, and then she will film it and sell it to you because she's that kind of lady. All right.
Also, we have a TikTok.
Oh, we have a TikTok. Yeah, I got to add that to the where we link to all the things. And so this is the part where I thank everyone for coming. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blade podcast, where I'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And I want all of you to know, I've never told anybody this, but the voice I use for the intro and the outro is also the voice I used when I was a docent giving tours of historical sites. We're walking, we're stopped. There you go.
Track.
There we go. All right. And with that, thank you for coming on, Terry, Jana, Heather, Nathan, Chloe. We appreciate it. All right. With that, I'm going to hit the end button. Boom!